that little church on Liberty Hill. Come praise the Lord, let your cup be filled. Raise your voices and we'll sing. Let God's freedom ring from that little church on Liberty Hill.
Go ahead and open, if you will, to Matthew chapter 15. Matthew chapter 15 and Mark chapter 7. You want to open up to Matthew 15, that's where we're going to start. But we will end up in Mark chapter 7, might do a little bit of back and forth. So those are going to be our two passages. They basically cover these events, some having a little bit more, or one having more than the other on certain parts. So we're going to be going a little back and forth. Now, to set this up, I want to remind us of what the kind of subtitle is of this series we're going through. We're going through a series where we're preaching through the Gospels. And I didn't have the picture to put up, but if you look on the website, you'll notice that kind of the graphic that goes along with our series, it says Gospels with the S crossed out because there's only one. And then it says, what would Jesus do? But the would is crossed out. What did Jesus do? Because have you ever noticed that whenever people want to say WWJD, what would Jesus do? A lot of times that question gets answered really by saying, what would I do? And I'll put Jesus' name to it. Right? People want to answer that in terms of their own feelings and wants and just say, that's what Jesus would do. Well, okay, let's not speculate about what he would do. Let's look at what he actually did. And so that's one thing we're going to focus on as we go through these events this morning. Starting in Matthew 15 in verse 21. In verse 21, it says, Then Jesus went out from there and departed to the region of Tyre and Sidon. Now let's stop a minute, because he departed from where? Well, we got to back up, see what we've been going through. Last time we saw Jesus, he was in the area of Gennesaret. So that's where the Bible has him. It's along the where's my northeast? It's along the western shore there of the Sea of Galilee. They're kind of towards the northwestern side of the Sea of Galilee. And Tyre and Sidon, you'll see these mentioned all throughout the Bible. They are actually Gentile regions. They're not Jewish. These are not Israelites. These are not people of God. They are north of Israel. They were part of the Persian Empire, the Assyrian Empire before them. They are cities that are kind of located along the Mediterranean coast. So if you kind of know your geography, I'll try to do this from your perspective. You have the Sea of Galilee, right? But then you have the Mediterranean Sea is over here. So Jesus is over here, the Sea of Galilee. He kind of goes up to this region, kind of the north up by the Mediterranean, getting away from Israel. Now, these are Gentile cities, as I said. So why does he go there? Why does he go? Well, if you were to jump over to Matthew chapter 7, verse 24 says, he entered a house and he wanted no one to know it. So I've read commentaries that say Jesus is kind of getting away from the crowds, right? If we notice, as Jesus has gone about, there's crowds everywhere he goes. He enters into a town, he gets mobbed. He's out in the wilderness and they follow him. Right, a couple weeks ago, we talked about the feeding of the 5,000. Why did he have to feed them? Because they followed him out in the middle of nowhere and there wasn't any food. So he fed them miraculously. And so some commentaries that I've read have said that he's kind of getting away. You know, let's get away from all this Jews, all these Jews and this hype and everything that's going on. He's going to get off alone with his disciples and go off into some Gentile territory. Maybe he'll get up there where nobody knows him and be able to have a little bit of a break. But it doesn't work. Apparently, he's known even outside of Israel. And as we see, Jesus is going to surrender his own plans to the needs around him. Matthew 15, verse 22. And behold, a woman of Canaan came from that region and cried out to him, saying, Have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David. My daughter is severely demon-possessed. So he's trying to kind of get away, a little retreat with the guys, maybe some little rest and personal teaching. But no, even up in Gentile territory, he's recognized. And this woman comes asking for him to help her demon-possessed daughter. What's interesting here, I like to point out the supposed contradictions, where people like to point out two places in the Bible where they go, look, it contradicts. But when you dig in, it does not. In Mark's telling of this, in verse 26, he says that the woman was a Greek, a Syrophoenician by birth. Okay, so which is it? Matthew's saying she's a Canaanite. Mark is saying she's a Greek, Syrophoenician. So which is it? Is she a woman of Canaan or is she a Syrophoenician? The correct answer is yes. She's both. This is one of those things where you have to understand who is writing and who they are writing to. That really helps you understand what's going on. Matthew is a very, very Jewish gospel. He is writing to the Hebrews. It is thick with Hebrew prophecy, all kinds of cultural Hebrew references. And so whenever he's making reference to this woman, he uses the ancient name of people of that region, Canaanite. That's something that would resonate with his Jewish readers. Well, now Mark is in Rome. He got his information from Peter, but he's in Rome and he's writing to predominantly Gentile believers. And so they're not going to be thinking in terms of Canaanite. They're going to be thinking in terms of what is the kind of common of that day name that those people would be known by. And so that's what he says. Right? And so there is no contradiction. It's referring to the same people group, just some different names that different cultures give them. So there we have no contradiction. Verse 23. So she comes up saying, please help me. My daughter's possessed. And he answers her, not a word. And his disciples came and they urged him, send her away, for she cries after us. But he answered and said, I was not sent except to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And then she came and she worshiped him, saying, Lord, help me. But he answered and said, it is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs. Whew, okay. Now here's an interesting thing, just a bit of a note, because if you know anything about the relationship between the Jews and the Gentiles call the Gentiles dogs. That's not a term of endearment. That's a racial slur. Did Jesus just utter a racial slur to this woman? That would seem to be what some have claimed. However, in some digging, some reading I've done, it said that, notice it says, do not give the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs. There's actually some indication that in the original language that's kind of a euphemism, not for like some, mongrel you don't like, but for more of a, for lack of a better way to put it, a beloved family pet. A beloved family pet. Now, they didn't have pets the way we have pets where we spend billions of dollars a year in dressing them and giving them manicured and haircuts, right? But they would have had animals that were kind of more, the indoor and the ones that they, liked more than just the beasts of burden out in the field. And so that's what this would have been talking about. More along the lines of a family pet. And so, no, Jesus is not using a racial slur here. So he's saying, hey, look, I came for Israel. I don't need to take what is for the children and give it to the family pet. And she says, verse 27, yes, Lord, but even the little dogs eat the crumbs which fall from their master's table. Then Jesus answered and said to her, O woman, great is your faith. Let it be to you as you desire. And her daughter was healed from that very hour. I love these long distance healings he does. Because there's times, we're about to see one where he does like some weird stuff, putting his fingers in a guy's ears and spitting and whatever, and it's just like, okay, what's with all that? And this one, he just says, it's done. This also shows the power that he has over evil. Right? I've said it over and over again. There's no struggle. Hollywood, it makes a great movie to see the forces of good and the forces of evil battling out spiritually. That's not what happens. When Jesus says no, demons tremble. There is no struggle. He wins. Just by walking in the ring, the fight's over. So Jesus graciously responds only after it's clear that the woman had no presumption of deserving this blessing or this healing that has been promised to Israel. He's the Messiah of the Jews. Right? I mean, this is what has been being taught. Clearly she seems to have an understanding of Jewish prophecy and what's going on here. Now, he's the Messiah of the Jews, but she's still coming up saying, hey, give me some too. But she's not demanding it as if she deserves it somehow. She's actually showing humility. Isn't it the case that too often we come to God with demands? That we think he needs to perform a certain way, and if he's not, he's being unfair? I actually hear the challenge or the complaint, the criticism, well, if God really loved everybody, then he would act this way. Why? Were we going to demand that we describe what the standards are and that God dance to our tune? That's arrogant. But here we have not her telling Jesus what he should do, but humbly requesting what she hopes he will do. And he's moved by her faith, and despite her being a Gentile, he had mercy on her. But here's an interesting question, though. Well, if Jesus came to save the whole world, right? John chapter 3. Whosoever. That's the whole world. I mean, whosoever. He's not being specific Jews there only. Whosoever would believe. And we know this thing goes global. Anyone in here Jewish? Like really, anybody here Jewish? Jewish descent? No? No, we're all Gentiles here, so we know it goes worldwide. So what's going on here where he's talking about that he only came for Israel? Well, here's the thing. Why we have to understand it in the context. Why we can't just pull out a little piece here and a little piece there and kind of try to look at it on its own. From cover to cover, there is a single story being told. From before God said, let there be light, there was a plan that was going to unfold to save mankind, which he knew was going to go wayward. So there's a plan in progress, and it started with Abraham. Kind of started a little before that, but the part where it just really comes on the scene, public, things are rolling, was with Abraham. And he makes this promise to Abraham that salvation will come, and from Abraham, all of the world will be blessed. But first, it's got to get its way through Abraham and his descendants. It was through them that everyone's going to get blessed. Romans 11 talks about Gentiles being grafted in. It uses the imagery of grafting in like a limb, like a tree limb. You know, you cut one off and you take another one, you kind of graft it in, it'll actually grow and meld together. And he's kind of using that analogy. That, hey, we weren't originally part of the tree, but we get grafted in. That we're now part of it. In Ephesians, it refers to those who are in Christ as being adopted. Right? Anyone ever sang the song, Father Abraham had many sons? Many sons had Father Abraham? I'm one of them, and so are you. But wait a minute, we're not Jews. Because we're adopted into the family. By faith, we're his children, not by descendant. The Bible is divided into two parts, the Old Testament and the New Testament. That word testament is just another word for covenant. The Old Covenant was with the Hebrews. When the New Covenant came in, it kind of took the place of, it kind of fulfilled the Old Covenant. New Covenant gets established with Israel. If you read in the prophets, when it talks about the coming of the New Covenant, he's talking to Israel. So the covenant gets established with Israel, and we get grafted into it. So Jesus is first establishing the new covenant. He's actually kind of building the thing into which we will be saved. So it's not that Jesus came and it's like, well, forget those Gentiles. I'm just here for the Jews. No. We're in step one. We're going there. We're going to get there. It's going to go worldwide. After the resurrection, going to give the Great Commission, send the apostles, every tribe, tongue, and nation, making disciples, baptizing them. But right now, Jesus has another focus, another purpose to get this step done before it moves to that one. So it's not that he's excluding Gentiles. They're just not the focus right at this moment with what he's trying to accomplish. And also, interesting thing that we'll note in a minute, he's healing. Nowhere in these passages do we see him teaching. But he heals them. We see his compassion showing forth to the Gentiles. He's not teaching them yet. He's going to leave that for the disciples later as the gospel goes forward. But right now, he's healing. Back to Matthew, verse 29. Jesus departs from there, that is the Tyre, Sidon region, and he skirts the Sea of Galilee and went up on a mountain and sat down there. Sat down where? Where's he at now? Man's moving, won't stay still. Well, over in Mark 7, verse 21, it says that when Jesus leaves the vicinity of Tyre and went through Sidon, down to the Sea of Galilee and into the region of the Decapolis. Now, the Decapolis is an area, kind of the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee. It gets that name, Decapolis, because Deca means 10, polis, cities. So there's a group of 10 cities that kind of make up this like league or union kind of just like area. And so people refer to it as the Decapolis. Now, it's still pagan. It's still a Gentile area. What's funny is if you look at the area that the Jews were promised, this fits in that area, but they never took it over. It's still Gentile area. So he's still in the land of the Gentiles. Verse 30. Then great multitudes came to him, and having with them the lame, blind, mute, maimed, and many others, and they laid them down at Jesus' feet, and he healed them. So the multitude marveled when they saw the mute speaking, and the maimed made whole, and the lame walking, and the blind seeing, and they glorified the God of Israel. Again, notice we see him, he's not teaching. His purpose has come to teach Israel into announcing the coming of the Messiah. The teaching for the Gentiles will come later. So again, if we stop and we think, what did Jesus do? He initially came out of Israel away from the Jews, seemingly to kind of get away from the crowds. But instead of crowds of Jews, now he's got crowds of Gentiles. But he still has compassion on them. These aren't his people. The Jews actually consider the Gentiles, I don't know if I'd say subhuman. They probably didn't think in those terms, but they're certainly lesser than. Right? They call them dogs. They're filthy. They're unclean. You're not supposed to associate with them. And here Jesus is wandering through their territory, healing them. He's having compassion on them. How many of us would find it all too easy to turn our backs on those who are different than us? How many of us would find it all too easy to just kind of turn that blind eye? To just not worry about it because someone has a different point of view? It's a lesson we can all benefit from these days, right? Seems like the cultural divides, the political divides are just getting wider and wider and wider to where those who differ from us stand out all the more because of their political views, their cultural ideas, their moral stance, and it's so easy just to view someone else as being that other group and thinking less of them. But we don't see Jesus thinking less of. We see compassion. We see him healing. We see him reaching out to them. Jump over to Mark chapter 7. Mark picks out a specific example, right? Matthew tells us the multitudes follow Jesus and they're bringing all these people for him to be healed. We're not going to go through this entire passage, but I'm going to just kind of tell you what happens. Mark picks out the specific example of this guy who's deaf and mute, cannot hear, cannot talk. And they bring him to Jesus, and Jesus does this weird thing where he like sticks his finger in the guy's ears, and he kind of spits, and he touches his tongue, and he says, "Be opened." And bam, the guy can hear and the guy can talk, and everybody's just marveled and amazed. And what's great is I can't help but wonder, yes, it's compassion, that he's healing these people and he's helping these people. But I wonder how much of it is he's also kind of laying the groundwork for whenever the apostles come back later with the gospel. They're going to remember, yeah, Jesus, he's that one that healed the guy. Do you remember he came through and we were bringing everybody to him and he was healing everybody? So now in a couple years, whenever the apostles come through proclaiming the gospel of Jesus Christ, crucified and raised from the dead, they're going to go, yeah, I remember that guy. I don't know. I just wonder if he's going to lay in the groundwork there for that to happen. Because as we just saw in Matthew 15, it said that he was healing all these people and they praised the God of Israel. So here he is among the Gentiles performing miracles, and the name of God is being proclaimed among people who are not the people of God. Mark chapter 8. Mark chapter 8, starting in verse 1. Now in those days, the multitude being very great and having nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples to him, and he said to them, I have compassion on the multitude, because they have now continued with me for 3 days and have nothing to eat. And if I send them away hungry, they will faint along the way, for some of them have come from very far. And then his disciple answered and said, how can one satisfy these people with bread here in the wilderness? They're a little dense. You ever get the idea they're not really paying attention sometimes? Because it was only a few months before that they were in this exact same situation, only then it was crowds of Hebrews, now it's crowds of Gentiles. And they said, oh no, what are we going to do? We can't feed them. And what did he do? He fed them. They've already seen him do this. Verse 5, so he asks them, how many loaves do you have? And they said, we have 7. And so he commanded the multitude to sit down on the ground. By the way, we know that these are 2 different events. Some people have tried to say that it's a retelling, a kind of repurposing of the same feeding event. The first one happened in Israel. This one's happening in a Gentile region. Before, it's 2 different numbers of people. That one was 5,000. This one is 4,000. Before he told them to sit down on the green grass. There's no mention of green grass here. Different time. There is no more green grass. Right over in Israel, you just got like maybe a month kind of window where you're going to have some green grass to sit on. Then it's gone, much like Texas. And so here there's no green grass. Right? So he says, have them sit down on the ground. And he took the 7 loaves and he gave thanks, and he broke them and gave them to his disciples to set before them. And they set them before the multitude. They also had a few small fish, and having blessed them, he said to set them before the multitude also. And so they ate and were filled, and they took up 7 large baskets of leftover fragments. Now those who had eaten were about 4,000, and he sent them away, immediately got into the boat with his disciples, and came to the region of Dalmanutha. So once again, Jesus showing his power, showing his authority, showing his ability to command miracles. And again, I think it's kind of funny that they didn't get it to begin with, but now they're seeing, again, hey guys, if you didn't get it the first time, I can do this. I can provide. Sometimes we need God's provision, amen? Sometimes we wonder, Lord, how can I get through this? God, there is no earthly way to get through this. There may not be no earthly way, but with Christ, more is possible. Now here we also have another possible contradiction. Because if you look there in that last verse, Mark 7:10 says they get into the boat with his disciples and they come to the region of Dalmanutha. But if you flip back over to Matthew 15, in 15:39 it says they get in the boat and they cross over to Magdala. Uh-oh. So where did Jesus go? Did he go to Magdala or did he go to Dalmanutha? Yes. Yes, he did. Now, this one is not entirely so certain, but it's the lack of certainty that actually makes it no contradiction. See, we know what Magdala is. We know what it is. We know where it is. It was a city. We can pinpoint it and show it on a map where archaeologists have found it. This is the city of Magdala. So we know right where that is. Interestingly, the only place where we find this other reference, Dalmanutha, is in the Bible. We don't know what it is. We don't know where it is. We don't know what it's referring to. Well, so if we don't know, how can we know it contradicts? If we can't actually point on a map and say, this is Dalmanutha, then how do we know it contradicts with Magdala? Now, it's an interesting thing. You want to scratch your head and go, I wonder what that is. But I know what it can't be, and it can't be a contradiction. So what is it? What could it be? Well, there's a few options. Option one, it's some other place entirely, and so we have a contradiction. Okay, well, but you need some evidence if you actually want to put that forward as the answer. Answer two, again, remember, Mark is writing to the Gentiles. Maybe they're using a different name. It could be a regional name. Maybe there were, for those whom that area was known as Dalmanutha. For instance, if I were to tell you, let's say I told these folks over here, we're having a conversation, I said, yeah, next week I'm going to Austin. But then in a different conversation, I'm over here telling these folks, yeah, next week I'm going down to Travis County. Is that a contradiction? No, because Austin is in Travis County, right? It's the same thing, just using different words. That's possible. Maybe Dalmanutha is referring to the region, and Magdala is the town. Possible. We don't know. We don't actually know because we don't know what Dalmanutha is. Or maybe it's a community kind of nearby that's just kind of assumed as part of Magdala. Maybe Magdala is the big town, and Dalmanutha is a village that just kind of gets assumed into the community of Magdala. Anyone know an example of that? Right? Anyone ever go to Waco? You ever go to Beverly Hills, but where do you tell people, yeah, I'm going to Waco? Belmead, Lacey Lakeview, Woodway, Hewitt, right? But you might just say, I'm going to Waco. Because it's all kind of wrapped up in the whole, just broad Waco regional area. And so people will say, Waco, when really they're going to a smaller city that's kind of attached to Waco, but it's all part of the same metropolis, if you will. And so there's all kinds of possibilities that we could see how Magdala and Dalmanutha, whatever they are, whatever it is, go together without being a contradiction. Now, does that mean that it's not a contradiction? Maybe it could be. Maybe we uncover something and go, hey, this Dalmanutha place is an entirely different city on the other side of the lake. Okay, well, now we have something we'd have to work out. But we don't have that. All we know is in one gospel it's called one name, and another gospel is called another name, and we have plenty of examples of places having more than one name. So there's no reason to assume a contradiction is going on here. Conclusion. Well, those are some wonderful stories. What do we take away from this? Again, what did Jesus do? Not just what would Jesus do, what did Jesus do? He's our example. He's our model. So we need to ask ourselves, what did he do that we need to emulate? Not what we imagine he might do in our situation, but what did he actually do in his situation? Two main things. First off, he changed his plans to match the need that was in front of him. I'm the worst at this. I have a plan. We have it laid out. Here's the way it's supposed to go. Don't change it. I was the one that we'd make up new movies coming out. Me and my friends. Okay, on Friday we're going to go see that movie. We're going to the 10 o'clock show. We're all going to meet at so and so's house. We all get over to so and so's house, and people go, "Hey, how about we go see this other movie instead?" No, that wasn't the plan. Right? Stick to the plan. That's just how I am. I just make a plan and work it out. If you wanted to do something else, you should have made a different plan. Right? But sometimes we need to be flexible. We need to be able to say, Lord, here is my plan, but what you've put in front of me is more important than my plan. It's your plan, and I need to give in to that and set aside my wants and my plans and my desires. And that's what we see Jesus do. It appears to be that Jesus is going off to a different region to get away from the crowds, only to find new crowds. And so he changes his plan to suit the need that is in front of him. Second, we see that he has compassion on outsiders and those that might even be considered enemy. He's a Jew, they're Gentiles. In most contexts, that is considered an enemy. In our culture, there are people who are different than ourselves, who have views and ideas and beliefs that are different than what we do, and oftentimes we will look at them and culturally, for practical purposes, they seem like the enemy. Whether we're talking cultural issues, political issues, personal issues, that we want to look at them and say, they are the enemy. Of course, like I was saying with the kids before, who does the Bible say the enemy is? Not flesh and blood, not other people. Other people are other lost souls like we once were in need of Christ. Devil's the enemy. Pride is the enemy. Sinfulness is the enemy. Other people are not our enemies. And so Jesus is among those whom everything in his culture would tell him they are the enemy. And instead he responds with compassion, with kindness, with helping. How often do we do that? Because it's real easy in our hot button, divisive, high emotion culture to view people on the other side as being the enemy. And they're not. So what would Jesus do? What should we do? What did Jesus do? He had compassion on those who might be considered his enemy, and he changed his plans to match what God had put in front of him. And we should do the same.
Every time I feel the walls closing, you cover me and breathe life in me again. Lord, though I feel the darkness come, I will not fear. You've ransomed me with blood.